Cuba, it's me! Welcome to the W.I.L.L.I.W show, which stands for Wrestling is Life. Life is Wrestling. This is episode 82, 82 days in a row. Now today, on my show, I wanted to talk about, was wrestling harder before than it is now? Or is wrestling harder now? Now, I've been going back and forth, and there's a bunch of different, not pros and cons, I guess, but different arguments can be made that some things now are harder, and some things now are easier. So I'll discuss a bit, and then hopefully this will open up the forum for other people to share their opinions. Now, back in the day, they didn't use as many moves. So I guess it was harder as far as there's way more moves to be used, and the attention span now, people want more moves. But back then, you could use a DDT or a super kick as a finisher. Now you can throw 5 super kicks in a match, or a couple DDTs at the beginning of the match. So it's way different that way. But not everything, but a lot of things have been done now. So to do something unique is way harder because so many things have been done, and to come up with a character that hasn't been done, well, good luck on that. That's like winning the lottery. But I mean, now it's easier in some ways as far as there's way more promotions, there's way more chances to get work, and it's easier to get in the wrestling business. And it's also easier to be discovered and go to the top through social media. But is it really easier? Because there's thousands and thousands of more wrestlers. Where back in the day, there wasn't very many wrestlers, so the chances of getting discovered, it was harder to get found. But once you get found, then it was easier to go to the top. But it was just about who you knew back then. And also, like, when I broke in, it was really hard if you were small. Like, I was the tiniest guy. Now I find I go to indie shows and I'm actually bigger than a lot of people, like, in height-wise anyway, maybe not in, like, body and physique. And that was really frowned upon, having a small guy. It should be someone believable that could beat you up. But who says, like, look at the UFC, they have the lightweight divisions and all the divisions. Who says if you're 5'8" and only 160 pounds that you couldn't beat somebody up? At least someone your size for sure. So there's a lot of different things to be weighed. That is it harder then, or is it harder now? Like, I find now it's easier for me now, but that's because I've learned more things and I know how to do things, and I can do less and get more out of it. But I find it's harder to keep up with the kids nowadays because they're amazing athletes. Back when I would wrestle, I'd be the small guy, and it was easy because the big guys, they didn't do a lot of stuff, so they just beat you down and you try and come back. But now, these guys can do a lot of things. Well, most of them anyway. They can do so many things. They're so athletic, and they're in great shape. Where back in the 70s, guys with pot belly or like a beer belly would smoke cigarettes before the match and go out there and wrestle an hour, but they would maybe run the ropes once. So it's like, and then also, like, in general, I guess I would say, I believe back in the day, the wrestling schools were a little bit harder as far as they break your legs and try to discourage you from coming in, where now it's easier to get into a school, but at the same time, I think it's technically harder as far as, like, the cardio they demand. I don't know. I guess it depends on each different school individually. And, like, when I broke in, I was lucky because the business was changing. Guys like Ike Shaw only cared about the money, so they were willing to give me, a guy that shouldn't have been a wrestler, a shot as long as I would pay him the money. Where back in 30 years before my time, you had to look like most of the time they got discovered at the gym, most of the guys, and the bouncers and the other wrestlers would go out to the club, and then it was like a secret society. Now you can just Google it, boom, you find a wrestling school, you have the money, you're there. And there is a lot of bad wrestling schools. So it depends what way you're looking at it, if it's easier or harder. I think it's easier as far as, like, most people, you can go out there and you got more opportunities and it's easier to be noticed. But is it really? Because it's like a needle in a haystack. Like, if they had social media back when I first broke in, it would have been great because there was barely any promotions and barely any wrestlers, so people would have shot up faster. So now, everybody has that exposure, and everybody can get work. There's so many promotions, but there's also way more guys. So it's like, how are you going to break through that glass ceiling? I mean, you got to really And then back in the day, like you had the territory days, and it was like word of mouth, and then the other promoters would work with each other and say, hey, you got a guy that you can send me? I need to get rid of these guys because they've worked here for a year. And you would go around, and then when Vince came in and took all the territories, he just picked his all-star team, right? Where now it's kind of the same thing, I find. They're going and they're picking all the best guys out of the indies, throwing them in NXT, and then whoever they want from there is going up to the top. And there's also a lot more spots, I find, too. Like, on the main roster, or not even, like, with including NXT in the main rosters, they must have, like, 300 people signed right now. Where back in the day, I'm sure they only had 40, or maybe even less than that, because they would bring in jobbers and just pay them for the TV tapings, but they were never actually signed to a contract. And I heard, like, some of the shoot interviews that they were actually only guaranteed not very much money. They, like, the contracts are much better now. And back then, they were just guaranteed a certain amount of dates at very little money, and then it was up to you to make the most of it. So I want to hear other people's opinion on this topic. It's really interesting. I mean, I guess it's harder for a guy who's only been wrestling for a year to say if it's harder now than then. But, like, for me, I was on the cusp. I started in 2000, and things were a lot different than they are now. And so those kind of guys, the veterans, it's really good to hear their opinion. Is it easier now or is it harder now? And I don't just mean, like, personally, like, not for me. Just look at it in general. Like, do you think it is or it's not? Because back in the day, we didn't have to do that much and we could be considered good. Now, all these guys can do everything. So do we have to be able to keep up with these amazing athletes to be somebody? Or can they still do old school and just be a character and wrestle a style? I guess people want to see a little bit of everything. Like, at the last show I wrestled, it was in Cambridge, and it wasn't a humongous crowd. And I would say around a third of them were kids. So about those people really liked my match, because I played silly and everything like that. And then everybody else that was there really loved Josh Alexander's match. So it's good to have different people to fill different voids, and you can appeal to everyone, and have the ladies too, because some guys just want to see the ladies, and especially the ladies, they want to see the ladies because it makes them feel inspired and be like, oh, see, look, we're tough too. And of course, like, girls can do anything guys can do, and there's a lot of girls out there way tougher than me, for sure. So what is it? Was it harder back in the days? And when I say back in the day, what do I mean? Like, for me, back in the day, it was 2000 when I broke in. But, I mean, was it harder to be a wrestler in the 70s? I know if you go back to, like, the 50s and stuff, I was, like, actually a fair, and you would go from town to town, and you would actually have to challenge the crowd, and if they won, they got prize money. So you actually had to be a good wrestler. And then it progressed, and it was like you actually had to be a shooter so you could take care of yourself if business ever went awry. Now somebody, like, you have to be tough to be a wrestler, but you don't have to be, like, super strong or, like, be able to win in a fight. As long as you can take a beating and you have heart and you're going to keep getting up, you could be a wrestler. But back in a certain era, you actually had to be able to defend yourself and be good at it because, you know, things like that happen a lot more. Nowadays, if something like that happens, well, and someone shoots on somebody, unless it's a really, really good reason, they're going to get a bad name for themselves because that's not how we do business, and you should be able to have a good match with someone and they can go out there and wrestle the next day and make more money. So it depends. But I still wanted to put the question out there because I know there's so many different specifics and intricate little details of how you want to look at the question. But however you do want to look at the question, I would love to hear what other people have to think. On episode 82 of The W.I.L.L.I.W show, you have to remember, like or you get a leg drop, comment or you get a clothesline, especially comment. I might have to throw a couple clotheslines in there, or a clothesline from hell. And subscribe or you get a suplex. I'm your host, Elian Habanero. Tell me what you think. What is harder now? What is easier now? Thank you for watching. I love wrestling. Cuba!